Welcome to Writers Talk. Today we have a special guest, Mia Botha. She's one of our main contributors and a long-time writer for Writers Write. She has her own website, and she'll be talking about that a bit later. In this podcast, we'll be talking about short stories and how to write them, why you should write them, and just everything about short stories. So without any further ado, I'm your host, Christopher Dean, and today I have Mia Botha. Hi, Mia.
Hi, how are you?
Excellent. You?
Very, very well, thank you. I'm super excited to be here.
So maybe just ask you a bit about yourself, Mia. Not that we don't know each other, but Mia's yeah, go on, Mia. Tell us, what do you do?
Okay, cool. All right. So what do I do? That is a question I ask myself almost every day. I am a writing facilitator for Writers Write. I have been teaching for almost 10 years now, and I love what I do. I get to read stories. I get to talk about stories. I get to live my stories. It's fantastic stuff. A few years ago, I started doing a lot with short stories and started a little online writing community, and got quite a few writers who write with me monthly. We have monthly monthly deadlines, and we have weekly deadlines. So yeah, it keeps us busy, it keeps us out of trouble, and we get a lot of writing done. So that's fantastic.
What's it called?
It's Deadlines for Writers is where we hang out. So it is all about whatever you learn at Writers Write, putting all that theory into practice and getting your story onto the page. So that is our exciting thing that we do there. My love affair with short stories started very, very long time ago. Firstly, obviously reading short stories. I am a huge fan of the Roald Dahl short stories, Kiss Kiss, Switch Bitch. I'm always intrigued with his twist in the tale. I'm a huge fan of Carol Joyce Oates. So these are all very, very awesome stories that I love reading.
What is Kiss Kiss? What does that mean?
Kiss Kiss, yeah, and Switch Bitch are two of Roald Dahl's anthologies.
Okay.
Very old short stories, very, very British. And he has a fantastic twist in the tale. His short stories are very, very different to his children's books. So he's most known for the BFGs and the Twits and all of his fun kids stories. But his short stories tend to be quite dark, and always a lovely, interesting twist in the tale that make you go, ah, which is what I love in a short story.
The only one I can really remember right now, I think I've read a few of his short stories, but I think it's Lamb to the Slaughter or something like that.
I can't remember the title. What happens?
Where sort of a housewife murders her husband with a leg of lamb. And the detectives can't find the murder weapon because she's been cooking it in the oven.
Yeah, that sounds like a Roald Dahl.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, no, he does that. Yeah, no, he has very, very interesting things in the. Yeah, but don't worry, we won't get into that now. I get very excited about it. So,
sorry to derail.
What else can we talk? Yeah.
But yeah, so yeah, Mia, you have a writing website where you encourage writers to write to a deadline, which is, I think, a very important way of getting writing done.
Yeah, well, so I come from an advertising background very, very, very long time ago. I used to make ads, and I think somehow in that I got stuck on the notion that I needed a deadline to get anything done. So I realized, I think it was in 2017, where I just realized I was doing a lot. I was talking about writing and I was writing about writing, but I wasn't doing any writing. So I said very publicly in a Facebook post, I think it was in a Writer Wrote blog post, where I said I was going to write 12 short stories in 12 months. And that is where this big short story adventure started, because when I said that, everyone goes, oh, I want to do it too, where I'm going to publish my story and how's it going to work? So that is where we went from a Facebook group to a little website that we have going and everything. So yeah, it's 4 years later, we're writing, this year we'll be writing our 5th batch of 12 stories. So we have lots of fun with that.
That's very, very exciting. Yeah. I just thought, you know, short stories are such a unique genre unto themselves. And why should writers be excited about them? What's the benefit of writing a short story?
Okay, there are many benefits, so brace yourself. But what I usually do is I compare writing and running a lot, which is quite weird because I don't run and most writers aren't really prone to physical exercise. I do walk a lot though, but just kind of the same way that you wouldn't wake up today, if the last time you ran anywhere was in high school when you were like in the athletics team, you wouldn't really put on your sneakers today and decide to do a 60K marathon without having some training. But sometimes with writers, the last time you wrote was in high school, and then we wake up one day and decide, oh, I'm going to write a novel. And then we wonder why it was hard, because you write every day, but you write reports, you write emails, you write all kinds of things, but you don't do creative writing. You don't put into practice every day. So that is one of the benefits of a short story, that if you want to start this novel writing adventure, just kind of try your hand at a few short stories just to get back into the swing of things. Short stories, they help you put things into practice that you want to try in your novel, but taking or making changes to your novel might be a big risk. Then you can jump onto a short story and go off on an experimental tangent and see where your characters end up. So that's a great thing to do. One of my favorite things about short stories is that it teaches you the value of every single word that you have to add into that story. One of the things we do on Deadlines for Writers is I use the word exactly. So each month has a different word count. 300 is the shortest, 2,500 is the longest, but the additional challenge is to write to the exact word count, exactly 300 words, exactly 2,500 words. And it's such an odd little thing, because what it sometimes does, if you submit 2,554 words or 48 words, that's fine. But the challenge is to go back and make your word count exact. Just forces you to read through your story once or twice more. And it's the weirdest little thing that happens, but it really, really forces you to reevaluate those words. So the brevity of a short story really teaches you the value of your words. Once again, the brevity forces you to focus. In a novel, we have a bit more time and a bit more space to explore and to go see where your character is. Whereas a short story, if you have 1,200 or 2,500 words, you have to kind of know where you're going to get the right impact for your short story. I use short stories often to teach writers about scene structure. So short stories is a fantastic way to understand beginning, middle, and end, goal, conflict, disaster, because the structure of a scene works so well for the structure of a short story. So it's a great thing to do that. Okay, I'm going to interrupt myself now. Sorry,
Right.
Chris, do you want to say
No,
something?
go on.
Okay, yeah.
Interrupt
So
away.
what we have to, okay, let's quickly just evaluate what a short story is, okay, because there's also a lot of room, and I should maybe have started there. So there are, of course, many definitions, many word counts, but a short story...
With the word count, 2,500 words, sort of like an essay kind of length, right?
Yeah, give or take.
Is that the upper end of a short story, or is that... Can they be longer?
That's pretty standard. They can definitely be longer. Anything under 1,000 words tends to be referred to as flash fiction.
Okay.
1,000 to 2,000 is a short story. 2,500 to 3,000, 4,000 words is kind of the average length for a meaty short story. But a short story can go up to about 6,000, 7,500 words. After 7,500, we're moving into novella, novelette. It's the cutest little word I learned the other day, novelette. It's yes. About, so it's 7,500, then again up to about 17 to 20,000 words for those. And then you start moving into the shorter novel space.
Right.
So yeah, if you're writing, let's work on an average of 2,500. Let's say you'll have about 2 medium-sized scenes or 3 shorter scenes if you want to build your short story like that. Or if you have enough in one scene, 2,500 can be one longer scene. So that might just help you to put your stories together a bit. But it's a great tool to learn to understand scene structure, which you can then apply to your novels.
So
if you yeah,
would you have a sort of beginning, middle, and end structure within that very short space in time to your short story?
Well, almost anything you write, whether it's a poem, whether it's a song, whether it's a movie, all fall into that beginning, middle, and end structure. That's the interesting thing about stories. So you'll definitely have a specific start. The fun thing with short stories is it allows you so much more space to experiment. So you will find different structures, you'll find different ways to tell stories within that, which is sometimes easier to wrap your head around a concept or to apply it to see if it's going to work for your novel again. So you can use it just to see if your experimental thought will work in your novel.
Okay. And with that sort of reduced length, what do you cut from a short story that you would normally include in the longer version?
The thing with word count is we don't want less story. We still want the same impact. But obviously with a novel, for example, now let's work on a very average genre novel would be roughly around 80,000 words. So obviously going from 2,500 to 80,000 words is quite a big jump. So what you would definitely have, which you would not really have in a short story, is subplot. So in novels, we weave in subplots. We tend to have definitely more characters, a larger cast, larger settings. So every time you introduce a setting or every time you introduce a character, you're going to have more description because we want to know what they look like, we want to know where we are. So that's definitely going to bulk up your story quite a bit. But once again, the challenge is to include it so that it helps advance the story and doesn't just end up being padding.
It would be like a normal scene in a novel, more or less, right? Those sort of scenes.
Yeah. So if we borrow the scene structure from a novel, you'll sit with a goal, a conflict, and a disaster. So your character has a goal that they would like to achieve. There is some kind of conflict or complication that happens within that story. Conflict and complication can be positive, it can be negative, it can be big, it can be small, anything that makes it difficult for your character to achieve that goal. And then we come to our conflict, which is usually the ending. Not our conflict, sorry, our disaster. The disaster, also, if you don't like that word, you can use the word hanger instead. But it is some kind of ending or conclusion that a story comes to. In a novel, that hanger or disaster will give you your next scene goal. In a short story, you can wrap it up quite nicely, and there can be an applied rest of the story, but you don't have to be able to progress with the story after that.
So that's a really just nice kind of way of going about a story, in that you get your immediate resolution, just in a few pages. So if you ask a question, you find out the answer. Well, you should, at least, I suppose, in a good story.
Yeah, I mean, we leave a lot of ambiguity and a lot of, there's a lot you can wonder about as well, which is quite fun with a short story, that they aren't always as neatly tied up in the end and completely finished. I mean, we have novels with ambiguous endings, so definitely you can have short stories with ambiguous endings as well. So that's lots of fun to do.
I was just also wondering, in terms of descriptive language, do you try and leave out as sort of like flowery kind of language, or do you include all the descriptions you would in a normal novel? Do you try and leave more space for dialogue?
It depends on the kind of writer you are, and that's where style and tone is going to play into it. I tend to be an underwriter, and I love dialogue. So my short stories tend to be very short, very punchy. I have to make a very big effort to go back and add in setting description and character description, because those are things I tend to leave out. But you still need it in the story. I can't write a story without those things. It'll be like, hearing two people talk on a black screen. Right. So it really depends on the kind of writer you are. Some writers write beautiful prose. Some writers are hysterically funny. So they can add in a lot of flowery prose and it'll be beautiful, and as long as it advances the plot. The same with humor. Funny is good. Funny always wins. But if you are going to have a joke, and my story isn't going to progress, my story doesn't advance, then it becomes the same thing as over-describing. You need to be able to cut it down. So it's trying to find that balance between writing in your style and tone versus advancing your story.
So do you have any sort of advice for both writing short stories, maybe some techniques about writing them, and any thoughts on whether it's a viable career for a writer?
Okay, cool. So let's break that down a bit. All right.
Right.
So the first thing is regarding techniques. Okay. So our techniques, the theory of writing doesn't change regardless of whether you're writing a short story or whether you're writing a novel. Show, don't tell is always a good idea. Don't describe too much. Don't describe too little. All of those rules still get going. Okay. You need to advance your story. You need to use dialogue. All of those fiction rules still change. That's why short stories is such good exercise, because you need to put all those rules into practice. Okay. The second thing regarding technique, because of the brevity of a short story, we have so much more room for experimentation. So you will find very way out structures for short stories. But I always try and bring my writers back, especially if they're cutting their teeth or trying to do this for the first time. What I find with writers trying to write short stories is they try to put too much into the short story. So, you know, where you need all of the stuff for a novel, we don't need that much. So I always
what sort of stuff is too much?
With a short story, it's almost like you have to zoom in. Okay, so if you imagine a camera, so with a novel, you zoomed out entirely, so you get to see the whole picture, or the big picture. Okay, that's what you'll end up with. Maybe not in the beginning, but in the end, you'll have the whole picture. With a short story, we try and zoom into one particular instant or one moment. Now, I can't remember who says the quote, but I'm going to think of it for a moment. But it's, don't write about the horrors of war. Write about the kids' burnt socks lying in the road. And that's one of my favorite short story quotes, because everyone, like, for example, wanting to tell a war story, it's such a big story. And there's so many people and there's so many elements, which really works for a novel. But for a short story, it's very difficult to work all of those things in. So I always advise my students, if they can, to really reduce their stories to that one moment. It's a Richard Price quote. Sorry, I just had to think about that for a moment. So Richard Price said, give me the kids' burnt socks on the road.
Interestingly, I typed the quote into Google, and actually your article is the first one that comes up with this. Well done there.
I might have used the quote several times before. Okay, so what happens with that is the horrors of war is such a big concept that it's very, like, almost, we get overwhelmed by it. But kids burn socks lying in the road, that's where the emotional impact lies. And that is why we write, that is why we read, is to experience that moment in someone else's shoes. So when I say bring your scene down or reduce your scene, is I often tell my students about the rule of one. Okay, so when we write short stories, obviously the longer your short story, if you're writing a 6,000 word short story, you can have a bit more. But for a 1,200 word short story, for a 2,000 word short story, there's not a lot of space. So I always recommend have one protagonist, have one antagonist, have one scene, have one setting, have one story goal to achieve. And if you just keep it down to all of those ones, you'll find that you'll be able to write a really, really strong story. Because you only have to describe that one setting, only have to describe those two characters. So it really, really helps to know what to put in and what to leave out. Because I think that's the hardest thing with writing always, is like, what do I need? What don't I need? So that's where the rule of ones helps you to automatically eliminate things you don't need.
I mean, so I suppose I was going to say there's doesn't seem to be a lot of room for like world building per se in a short story. But I mean, with your example of the burnt socks, I mean, it really goes a long way to conveying something about the setting that you're in, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, it just comes all your senses in that particular moment.
Absolutely. So there's nothing
of where people are. Sorry, go on.
No, sorry. I get excited. There is nothing you have to add, or that you can do in a novel that you can't do in a short story, okay, except for the word count. But when I read a short story and it's a fantasy story, I don't want less world building. I still want my full world, I still want my experiences, but that's where we have to be smart. So, I mean, Shame, I always feel so sorry for beginner writers, because I always harp on about show, don't tell, but it's still one of the most effective tools to get as much story into your scene as you possibly can. And that's exactly what that what the burnt socks are. It's showing me what the cost is of this war. Whereas when we just talk about the horrors of war, it's such a generalized phrase. You know, we throw it out there and it's, oh, shame, terrible. But the minute you give me the people who live there and who are really affected by this war, that becomes a showing tool. And once again, that's where the emotional impact comes in. And because that image that the writer creates is so vivid, it's almost like I don't need even, the rest is all there without my having to say it.
Yes, that's a very good way of describing that, I think. Yeah, if you could just maybe tell us about some of your favorite short stories, maybe where to find them.
Okay, so as I said, I love Roald Dahl, I love Carol Joyce Oates. The New Yorker publishes such good short stories, and obviously you can read them. So jump onto that, give it a Google on the internet, go find those stories. What you'll find, because of the experimental nature of a short story, or that it allows so much experimentation, you are going to find that there's so much variety in those short stories. So where I've just suggested reduce as much as possible, you might find a writer who excels at telling very big stories in a very limited number of words. So that's the beauty of all these short stories. But if you want to write them, you have to read as many as possible. Annie Palou is one of my favorite writers. Obviously, Brokeback Mountain is a fantastic short story to go read. What's interesting about that short story is that it started as a short story. I think she's written a novel, and it's ultimately become a movie. So it's such an interesting progression to see how you go, because her short stories tend to be quite long. They're about, I think, 7,000 words. So when you read that, to go see how she expanded it into a novel and then ultimately into the movie as well. It's lovely stuff. My favorite story of hers is The Half-Skinned Steer, which is an incredibly weird story. But I really, really enjoy that one. So it's very, very nice to read.
Oh, okay. So the New Yorker, which is a magazine, did they just publish short stories as part of the publication, or is it a separate issue?
No, I've actually only ever Googled it, so I actually don't know how to subscribe, if you have to subscribe to them, whatnot, but they're fairly easily available. But if you just Google New Yorker short stories, you'll find them. You can submit them as well as a writer, because obviously that's another benefit of short stories, is that there are many anthologies, literary magazines that are open to these. Some of them are paid for, some of them are free, some tend to be very, very prestigious, that you can submit your work to. I know one of our very, very nice one is the Commonwealth short story. It has an incredible prize to win. There you have to be a citizen of a Commonwealth country. So that's a great short story to enter. Then, do you want to say something?
No. So, I mean, that's probably moving on to is it possible to earn a living, sort of as a short story writer? I know there are a few publications that are quite famous. Well, there's I think Sci-Fi magazine releases a collection of short stories every year. Obviously, all sci-fi stories, and that's quite well known. And you'll see that book, in bookstores every year under a new publication. But is there any sort of way to have a sort of constant kind of I suppose stream of income as a writer if you're trying to do this full time, or is this just a sort of hobby for writers?
Look, I always tell my students, no matter whether they want to write short stories or whether they want to write novels, is don't quit your day job yet. Okay. It takes quite a bit of time to earn money from writing. You can definitely do that. Yeah, I mean, if you look at published authors, the mid-list authors, quite a lot of them still have full-time jobs, and then they write over weekends or in the evenings. So if you look at, there are many websites. I know you can go onto Medium, you can go onto, goodness, I can't think of what the orange one is. I should know this. Okay, I'll think of the name in a moment. Yeah, but it's also another site that you can submit to. There is also Submittable is also a lovely function to use, where you will find lists and lists of magazines, anthologies, everything looking for stories, looking for everything. And you'll also see there, some of them are paid for, that you will get paid $5 for 2,000 words or something like that. Or there is, and of course these prices vary quite a lot with the skill, the degree, the quality of the publication, everything. Lots of them you can just submit to and they would publish your story, and then it was just about the prestige of publication. Then there are also, you'll find many competitions. There are paid for competitions, there are free competitions. Let's always remember with a paid for competition, it's a much smaller pool, so your odds of winning are increased. Free competitions obviously have a very, very big pool. And hopefully if they have enough writers, they'll get through all of that stuff. But yeah, so just take a look at that stuff and be careful when you submit your work. Make sure that the publication you are submitting to is legitimate and a prestigious or a good publication to submit to.
So the one publication you mentioned, also not the publication, one organization was the Commonwealth short story?
It's a Commonwealth short story. So obviously you have to be a member or a citizen of a Commonwealth country. And then what they do is they choose a winner from, I think, each continent or region. And then out of that is they choose the main prize winner. I think the competition opens in September. It's a free competition to submit to. And then the prize money is really, really good. I think it's one of the biggest prizes. And it's in British pounds, which is always not a bad thing to earn in.
That's a nice prize.
Yeah,
and I think they must be, ones just for anyone internationally as well. I'm sure probably Booker does a short story.
There are many, there are many ones, many competitions. It's a little bit overwhelming when you start looking for these things. It goes crazy because then I can submit to this, I can submit to this. Always double check. Some of them are limited to region, for example, only North America or only Canada or only this or that, or writers from that. So just be aware of that you may not be eligible to submit to certain areas. And like, for example, the Commonwealth, you have to be a citizen. But yeah, so just make sure, read the T's and C's. For some other reason, when writers start submitting their work, it's like they go a little bit crazy and they don't always think about what they really should be doing. So just keep that in mind, that you have to very, very carefully look at where the story goes, where it's going to appear, who gets paid, if they get paid, what are the rights, how long do they keep the story, do the rights revert back to you. So just be careful of submitting everything.
No, that's certainly true. You have horror stories about people even just in universities and just writing their short stories for their degrees and suddenly finding they don't actually own the rights to the publication of this thing because they submitted it as part of the university license or something like that.
Yeah.
But I just I had a random thought. Do publishers look out for authors who write short stories? Is it like a sort of oh well, this person wrote such a good story, a short story, maybe I should consider them for a longer work or something like that?
Most traditional publishers, if you go look at their submission guidelines, will say no short stories.
Right.
For some other reason, people buy novels. They tend not to buy short story anthologies. When we do read short stories, we tend to read them online. So there are quite a few like EPUB publications which do quite well and stuff, but traditional publishers very rarely would look at that. You will find some e-publishers or even lots of vanity publishers. That's something you have to be a little bit careful of, because a vanity publisher, you pay to submit your short story. If your short story is chosen to be published, you do get a part of the profit, but it's a very small part. So if the story has 17 submissions and it's sold for $5, you get $5 minus the sale costs divided by 17. So you can see it's not a huge amount of money unless it is a runaway bestseller, which it doesn't happen as often as we'd like it to happen.
Right.
So yeah, just be wary.
I suppose one place you do see a lot of short stories is in language classes. in schools and universities and such. Even, well, actually, I'd say mostly you see it in sort of second language settings, really, don't you? Or you're studying a different language, and you see a lot of compilations of short stories that, you know, the professor will give the class to read as assignments and such. So I suppose if you can find your way into that sort of setting, it might actually be quite profitable to get entrenched in that sort of system.
Yeah, to get your short stories published by a traditional publisher, you have, most of the time, they only published short stories of established authors. So for example, if they've already published 4 of your novels and you have an anthology of short stories, you'll say, okay, do that for me, okay. And the same with the universities. If you look at, they won't just take a single writer's short story or something like that. It has to be a writer with quite a list. And then they'll start using those stories. It's easier to teach from a short story than it is, you know, with a big group of people, a very diverse people, and if you don't have as much time to learn from short stories. I'm looking at my studies at the moment, and when we submit portfolios, it's primarily short stories. I think only when you get to the master's side, they'll start looking at full novels, although I haven't investigated that, so correct me if I'm wrong. But
well, it seems to be true. Not that I've done that sort of degree, but one of our other contributors, Oliver, is doing that currently, and I think he has to write a novel as part of his master's.
But that's as masters. For the rest, it's just short stories primarily. And like I said, it's just, I think, to see if you can apply the theory as it was learned. So, and I think it's a challenge for a lecturer to mark or to read all of those novels. So I think when you get to masters, the class is considerably reduced, and then you can look at stuff like that. So.
Okay. So, I mean, unfortunately, it is hard to make a living doing this, but it's really good practice for a writer to do this. Yeah. And I just wanted to speak about a few people I know who do write short stories and who are successful authors. Neil Gaiman comes to mind. Love him or hate him, but he speaks a lot about the value of just writing down a short story and getting it out. The late Terry Pratchett used to also say that if you don't write your short story, it's just going to bounce around in the world until someone else writes down the idea, and then it's theirs. And you won't have it anymore. No. Stephen King also says, write it down now, and then maybe you'll just have it for writing fodder later, even if you don't do anything with it. You have a great idea. You can always expand a short story into a full novel, or do whatever you want with it, a script or something like that. Is that something that you'd recommend writers do?
Yeah, once you have it, it's yours. So just write it down. That's the important part. And it's less overwhelming to write a short story than it is to write a novel. One of the things Neil Gaiman does really well is if you go onto his website, you'll see he's quite generous, and he's got many of his short stories on there that you can read for free, which it's so, he's such a delightful writer, and he's so way out, and it's just like, how did we end up here? So he's a fantastic writer to learn from. So what you can also do with that, you might not be able to publish your short stories as you can a novel through a traditional publisher. But what we're seeing as well is a definite rise of short fiction sales doing really well on things like Amazon. So if you think how people enjoy reading the shorter books. So in the old days, we had to have these very, very long books, whereas today the novellas do quite well on Amazon, which is just a really long short story. So it's very, very good to do that. If we and then someone like Neil Gaiman, use it as part of your author platform. So it's such a nice way to showcase your writing for prospective readers. So create a little website and put your short stories up on your own website. And when they read a short story and they go, hey, I like the short story, but look, he's written a book, click through and then go buy the writer's novel. So that's one way to use your short story to generate an income. It's a very effective tool to use.
That seems like a really good idea, because I traditionally, mostly when I've come across short stories, it is because I've read other longer works by the writer. So it's probably the other way around. Like you have someone like a Robin Hobb who then, publishes a set of short stories in her world. Or, I don't know, there's a few others I can think of, but it's not really worth talking about. But that is, I think, traditionally how most people come to it. So So as part of your author platform, a short story would be a great tool to get a reader on board with you, I imagine.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And yeah, sorry, what you can also do is, like you're saying, like Robin Hobb still writes stories in that world. So if you've got a very fun, quirky little side character who might not evolve into a full novel, but it's such a nice place because your readers don't want to leave your world, but you might not have a full novel ready yet, isn't just to give them a little short story to tide them over until you're ready. So it's a wonderful way to
I
get
mean,
them going.
I read quite a few Japanese novels, and often they attach a little like addendum to the end of, if it's part of a series, right? They'll have 3 or 4 short stories at the end of a novel about side characters or something that wasn't really part of the story, you know, but it was just like a fun thing that happened. I mean, you never see that with you know, English books, but it might be something to consider, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, if you go onto, I think it's Sarah J. Maas, who wrote the Grishaverse. Her whole website's like the Grishaverse and everything. And she's written so many books in that universe, so that whole website is dedicated to it. I mean, J.K. Rowling has a whole Potter world and everything. But if you go onto Sarah J. Maas as well, if you go onto Sarah J. Maas's website, there are quizzes you can do. There are more characters that you can read about. It's really such a fantastic experience. And that's where all those short stories come into play, is to go put them up there and you keep your readers engaged in your world.
Yeah, another way of, it's also just another way of maybe commercializing on your success of a already successful author. Because if you look at Terry Pratchett, when he was alive, he had his main series of books, and then he'd always there would be companion books to them, and they'd always contain a narrative of some sort. Like he had a cooking book, you know, and it sort of contained a weird little notes from the editor on the weird things that were going on in there, or he had a guide to the railway system he'd written about in another book, you know, and had a weird little story. So I mean, it doesn't have to be, I suppose what I'm saying, the short story doesn't necessarily have to be a compact, contain 2,500 words continuously. It could just be scattered over another kind of publication, as maybe they've done in those examples.
Yeah, that's the fun thing of a short story, is it isn't such a big commitment, so you can do with it what you want. I mean, with a novel, you pretty much have to stick to your guns and be aware of genre requirements and be aware of length and stuff like that. But with a short story, you have so much freedom. Anything from a 300-word flash fiction piece right through to a 7,000-word short story, that's a whole lot of room to play. So that's also that magic bit that comes in there, is that there's a lot of freedom for the writer.
I mean, that's certainly true, and you know, it makes me want to go and just look up more short stories now, and give them a go. But Mia, I hear tell that you have some sort of technique that you'd like to talk about for writing short stories.
That was my rules of one. Okay, where I just go back and keep it as simple as possible. Keep it down to one protagonist, keep it down to one antagonist, because your protagonist has a story goal they want to achieve. The character in opposition to that story goal is their antagonist. So whatever that conflict is comes out of that opposition. I want it, he wants it, I'm going to be there first, he's going to be there first. And then whatever conflict comes out of that, reduce it to one setting, to one scene, keep it as simple as possible, and then give us an awesome conclusion. So if you don't waste your time on too many settings and too many descriptions, you're going to have really enough space for a really amazing plot.
I mean, it's sort of when you speak of like your rule of one, it sort of reminds me of Kurt Vonnegut speaking about stories, and he draws a graph, you know, when he speaks about them. He says it's the low points, the high points, the conclusion sort of thing. Right? And it gives you like a line graph and depicting that sort of thing. With your short story, it's just going to be 3 points, right? So you're going to have your sort of introduction, your conflict, and then your resolution. So maybe
the goal, conflict, disaster. I don't like storylines that go up and down. At Writers Write, when we teach, we use a diagonal line that starts at the bottom and ends at the top of the page. What you'll find, something like the hero's journey, for example, is often depicted as a circle.
Right.
And then most of the time it is the graph will go up a little bit, then it plateaus a little bit, then it goes up again, and then it plateaus, and then it goes down again to the conclusion of the story. And I find when you explain it to writers like that, they kind of think that when it comes to the plateaus, they can take a bit of a break. It isn't on them to have that constantly increasing conflict. So that's why
seems dangerous to state it that way.
Yeah, you've read those books, you know, the first 3 chapters, well, oh, this is the coolest thing ever. And then it's kind of like, tra la 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 la, nothing, nothing, nothing. Okay, a little bit of action, conclusion, and then we get to the end. So that's why I like that diagonal, which is it's a series of events with constantly increasing conflict and action. That is what we have to constantly remind ourselves of. And yeah, that's also why I don't mind the hero's journey circle as much, because the circle is at least in constant motion. There's no plateauing at some point.
I think there's some variations of the hero's journey that might work very well for a short story. Sort of like your hero goes somewhere, is changed, comes back, changed. Feels differently about their position or something like that.
It's the beginning, the middle, and the end. Okay, so Janet Fitch has amazing rules of scene, which I always share with my students, and it applies to a short story so well. So she says a scene starts and ends in the same place physically, because that's sometimes what's hard for a writer, is that one setting, and it helps so much just to contain your story. So a scene starts and ends in the same place physically. It starts and ends in a different place emotionally. Now that's sometimes where we forget the most, is whatever, like you're saying, the hero feels differently about where he ended up. Because whatever happened in that conflict has to have changed the hero. There has to be a story arc. The character who started is not the character who ended. Obviously, in a 1,200 word short story or 2,500 word short story, we're not going to have this full development of character arc. You know, this person who suffered years of abuse isn't suddenly going to be this strong person. You know, it's going to be a progression for them to strengthen.
Right.
But in the short story, you have space for that first change, that first twist, where they go from, I'm not standing for this anymore and I'm leaving. That is a big enough progression to have. And then the last thing, it's a point of no return. So whatever happened to the character in that conflict is something that can't be changed or taken away from them, be it good or bad. And that's where we end.
So would you say they should always end in a different emotional state than they begin their story in?
Yeah, so either different or increased. So if you're writing, if you're writing something like a horror or something that's a little bit scary, and your character, you're already starting on a very ominous tone, and your character's nervous and weary, you know, they have to end pretty scared. So if they start off terrified, they have to end up very terrified. So whatever that increase in emotion is that we can experience there. If they start off in love, do they end up disgusted? If they start off happy and cheerful, do they end up very sad and morose? Whatever happened in that conflict.
Okay, that's
right.
I think that's a great shortcut actually to thinking about a story. Just to consider the the thought, the emotional state of that person when they begin the story, and consider the end.
Yeah.
And if they are the same. Are you sure you've told the story, I suppose?
Yeah. There are very few characters who remain the same, who remain unchanged by their stories. But the trick with that is the emotional change, is to remember that we have to show an emotional change through action. Because that's the danger of telling a writer to focus on emotional changes. They start focusing on inner conflict, which becomes reflection, whereas readers like stories with outside action. So your challenge is to find that emotion, and how are you going to show it to us as action?
Do you have any tips for that?
Body language is such a fantastic tool. Okay, so let's use a story. Okay, let's use the example of they start in love and they end up disgusted. Let's say this young lady is on her way to meet her partner for lunch. She is so excited, she's thrilling. How am I going to show that she's excited? Okay, first of all, she's most likely taken a lot of care with her appearance. So as she walks past the glass in the store window, she might catch a glimpse of herself. She's wearing a pretty new dress. I don't quite know if she'll be skipping in Midtown New York, but however would you use that? She's got a brisk pace, and she can't wait to get there. She greets everyone, big smile on her face, okay? Because I want to show that she is happy and excited, Okay. Then she very quickly turns a corner, and at the restaurant where she's supposed to meet her beloved, who isn't a very smart man, by the way, or a very smart person, is standing outside and is either flirting with the waitress or is perhaps saying a very passionate goodbye to a colleague because the lady is early and they weren't expecting her at that time. Okay, so how are you then going to show that she's seen something she doesn't like seeing and she's now sad? So for example, if she was walking at a leisurely pace saying hello to everyone and looking at her own appearance in the mirror, so in the glass windows as she's passing, she would most likely, when she walks away, have her head down, put her jacket on perhaps because now she wants to cover up her pretty dress, and then she storms off. So how in body language can I show her emotional state?
Okay, that's very useful. Well, Mia, I feel like I've learned a lot about short stories in a very short amount of time, which is probably appropriate.
Yeah, well, brevity being what it is.
Excellent. So,
Okay.
where can people find you if they want to know more about short stories and how to write them?
If they want to join us, it's called the 12 Short Stories in 12 Months Challenge. You will find us on deadlinesforwriters.com. You have to create a profile to participate, and then you select your short stories. We have monthly deadlines, so you'll go on, you'll find the prompts tab, and you'll see what the prompt is for that month. You will see what the word count is for that month, and then you will see what the deadline is for that month. The deadline is a 24-hour window that you can post in. So from 8 a.m. the one morning to 8 a.m. the next morning is the only time you're allowed to post, and you submit one short story and you read 4 short stories. So it is an amazing learning experience because you have to be able to evaluate and comment on another writer's story. So, and it's a very nice, kind place because I make everyone be nice and kind. But they are very nice people. Yeah.
And
so
can people find you on social media anywhere?
We're pretty much on Facebook. You can find us on Instagram, and we have a very, very lax Twitter presence, so don't go find us there.
So
but you'll find us
Deadlines for Writers.
Deadlines for Writers. Okay.
Perfect.
That's
Thank you for joining me today, Mia.
Oh, it's such a pleasure, Chris. I can't wait to see your short story on the site.
Oh, sure. I'm sure it'll show up very, very soon. No, don't worry. Don't even worry about it. Don't even look for it. You'll see it when you see it. Anyway.
Oh, don't worry. I know where to find you. Okay, cool stuff. Thank you, Chris, for your time. I appreciate you inviting me.
Thanks so much for being here, Mia. My name is Christopher, and you can find me at Christopher Luke Dean at Twitter or on writerswrite.co.za. Thank you, everyone, for listening.